Hi, everyone. This is Joe Ozimek with Coachella Valley Water District Environmental Services Group. And what we're going to be reviewing today is pesticide application and sensitive receptor awareness. I realize that all of you have been or will be taking the personal protection course that certifies you to apply the pesticides, and that's an annual refresher. This will supplement that information. And what we're going to be talking about is guidelines for protecting sensitive receptors. So probably asking, what are sensitive receptors? That's what we're going to talk about. Wellheads, storm grates, irrigation canals. We're going to talk about that and how to make sure when you're applying this material in the field, how to protect those receptors. Now we're going to touch upon environmental safety, just to recap of some of the things that you've already been trained on to protect yourself. We'll talk about spill prevention and response. If you have a spill of material, what do you need to do and how to coordinate that? And then lastly, the containers that you have, you've been managing them properly. We want to recap that and where those materials go, the empty drums that are rinsed out. All right. As we go through this, if you have questions, note them down and review them with your supervisor, and I'd be glad to review those with the supervisors. So guidelines for protection of water supplies. So, what we're referencing here in looking at sanitary, domestic, and irrigation, what I've listed here is the California Safe Drinking Water Act. This is a guideline that was put together some time ago. And if you're not aware, basically that document references safe distances when you're applying pesticides and herbicides. So when you go out in the field, what we want to be aware of is that, there are storm grates, there are wells, there are lakes and ponds, obviously, that you might be coming close to, and we want you to be aware. This is all about awareness of those sensitive receptors, because as you're applying that material, we don't want to get too close to those and jeopardize any of that material that you're applying to remove or take away the foliage and getting into any of the water supplies or the sources of the water supplies. So when we look at minimum safe horizontal distances, as we review the guidance document, okay, there are a lot of different references in terms of safe distances. Asking yourself, looking at lagoons and ponds, 500 feet, storm sewers under sanitary, 50 feet. Now, how do you remember all this when you're out in the field? You got enough to deal with on a day-to-day basis. What I've done is I've looked at where you're applying these materials. I've talked with your supervisors, and we're going to standardize this, okay? We're going to look at all these safe distances and consolidate them into one easy, recognizable thing to consider. Now, when you go out in the field, we're not asking you to take a tape measure and measure off the distance. What we're asking you to do is look at these receptors, be aware of, if you go into a sanitary site, a domestic or irrigation area, to be aware of where these receptors might be. Kind of look, 360 degrees in the area that you're applying and make sure that, we don't get too close to them. So in looking at that, come up with some scenarios, okay? So when we look at a pond in the upper left-hand corner, okay, basically we want to look at safe distance of 50 feet. You don't want to apply within 50 feet. If there is foliage that you have to deal with, let's look at alternate ways to manage that overgrowth. Maybe going in with, a weed whacker or some physical means to remove that material. Because as you apply this material, okay, we could have drift that gets into that surface water. The material that you apply to the soil, if you get a windstorm or a wind gust, it can pick up that dust, it can drop it right into that pond. So if you do have situations like this, work with your supervisor, look at alternative means to removing the foliage. Same thing applies to catch basins in the upper right-hand corner, and also water wells, okay, which I've located in the bottom center position there. So rule of thumb, don't apply materials within 50 feet of any of these receptors that you see. If you have any questions, again, talk to your supervisor and I'll work with them to resolve any outstanding questions, comments, or concerns you might have. So a couple of reminders as far as field application. I'm not going to do too deep a dive into this. It's just a reminder that when you're using this material, make sure you have eye protection. You're wearing gloves, protect your hands, skin. Of course, you're wearing your uniforms with long sleeve shirts, etc. So just a reminder to use your PPE in the field. When you're labeling containers, and I know we've gone through this already in your annual refresher training, or will be, okay, you want to make sure you put your pesticide mixture name on the container, the ratio and formulation, and I've circled that in the lower box in the center of the slide between facilities and maintenance and irrigation. Those are the approximate mixture ratios that you're using. The one thing to be aware of as you look through the SDSs, which I know you have or will be doing, when you look at the material, the Roundup particularly, that material is already 50% or close to 50% water. So you're really diluting this material down. It's 50% water to begin with, and you're already adding water. And then you have the additional material that's being added, the surfactant that allows it to work more effectively when it comes in contact with the green foliage. Regardless, I just wanted to make sure that you get the formulations labeled as well, the action word, caution, and then of course the address. Again, if you have questions, talk with your supervisor. One thing I'd like to make mention is that these mixture ratios, I went out and collected samples from both facilities and irrigations ratios, and collect samples, sent up to an independent third-party laboratory, and ran flash points. So in the laboratory, they'll heat the material up, and they'll make a determination on how combustible that material is. And as I was saying before, a lot of the mixture that you have is made up of water. So not surprising, the flash points are pretty high. In fact, they didn't flash. So to give you kind of a benchmark in terms of what it means to have a flash point greater than 212 degrees Fahrenheit, NFPA, National Fire Protection Association, ranks these categories in terms of what's considered flammable and combustible. And based on these ratios and the data that we have in file now, we know that this material doesn't flash and is not combustible. So in terms of any safety related issues or concerns you might have, understand that the material is not combustible nor flammable. So continue on, some reminders, okay, and you went through some of this in your training. As a reminder, we want to look at 4 general areas when you're applying the material to keep those receptors that we reviewed previously safe, regardless of the distance of 50 feet that we're using as a benchmark. You want to be aware that application height poses a risk to receptors when you're using that material. Really what you want to do is you want to apply the material at the lowest possible height, because if you're using wands or extensions, nozzles at a higher elevation off the ground, say 10 or 15 feet above the ground versus maybe 3 to 4 feet off the ground, as you go up in height, the wind's going to pick that material up and it'll just blow it to areas that maybe you didn't intend to apply the material. So consider application height. It reduces the exposure to wind and drift. Okay, droplet size and pressure. You want to make sure that you don't exceed nozzle manufacturers' recommended pressures. And you always want to work with a lower nozzle pressure, because when you do, you're going to have larger droplets, and those larger droplets are a little bit easier to control than if you had a fine mist. Think of it in terms of aerosol cans. When you spray with an aerosol can, you're looking at a wide area of coverage. Okay, here you want to be a little bit more precise in how you plan and apply that material. So if a higher flow rate is needed, just consider that as far as the nozzle pressure. Okay, temperature and humidity. You want to be aware that at higher temperatures and lower humidity, in the hot, dry weather of June, July, August, okay, the material is going to evaporate, readily, more so than if you did it in cooler weather, say in, December, January, February. So you want to be aware that evaporation is most severe when it's both hot and dry. And then rule of thumb when you're applying the material to exercise control over where that material is distributed and applied, you don't want to exceed wind speeds over 10 miles per hour. Okay, guidance and best management practice suggests that drift potential is lowest between wind speeds of 3 and 10 miles per hour. Now, we're not asking you to go out the anemometer and look at wind speeds, but you'll have a good feel for when you go out. Obviously, when it's windy and gusting, I wouldn't apply the material because you're going to have a hard time exercising control over that stuff. Not only in terms of the receptors and protecting them, but also getting on yourself. It just becomes messy when you're using that material and applying it. I know I've worked with bug sprayers and hand wands, and it's a lot more difficult dealing with windy conditions, especially when it's dry and very hot. So just take into consideration and remember these things that we're talking about. And if you need to go back to any of these slides, your supervisors have copies of these. So if you want to take notes, you want to take a look at this information again, it's going to be available to you. So talking about spills, if you do have an incidental spill, what are the considerations? Okay, so before you use your equipment, you should always be doing your pre-shift inspection, not only the application equipment, but also your mobile equipment, your vehicles. Okay, do visual checks for leaks, look for staining beneath the equipment, drips from hoses or connections. Here's an example of a piece of equipment that I saw in our storage yards. It was leaking hydraulic oil. It's like, don't only look at the material that you're using in terms of pesticides, herbicides, but also look at your vehicles and the equipment in the field. You always want to use your SOPs and your safe work practices and making sure that we're addressing this. And we do use secondary containments when we're storing material, and we'll talk about some of that in a minute here. So how do we prevent spills? Okay, so prevention is key because we don't want it to leak onto the ground and to get into any of the receptors that we talked about. So the one thing is always remain with the unit during mixing. Don't fill a tank and then walk away and come back in 15 minutes and realize that it's topping off and overfilling. Okay, we don't want to do that, because we're wasting material. It's costing the district money and time on your part and having to clean the material up. Okay, when we store material, okay, we've ordered the secondary containments. To make sure that if any spillage does occur from a tank or a container or a drum, it's contained in these yellow poly spill containments. Okay, spill containment can be made up of plastic, concrete, or double wall construction. We like to use these because they're portable, mobile, they're easier to work with. Okay, but the bottom line in using any containment is that it should contain 100% of the product in the largest container, because if any one of those ruptures, we just want to make sure that the containment it's sitting on can hold the volume. So continuing on with spill control, you all have spill kits either out in on the shop floor or in the storage yard, or with you on in your vehicles that were provided to you by safety. I've included a reference if you do use your spill kits and you run out of material. Down below there, HTTPS, NewPig, they're a reputable resource with reasonable costs that can provide you any of the materials that you're going to need in terms of booms, absorbent pads, floor dry, and as far as containers. On your trucks, keep bags, trash bags, or a 5-gallon pail with you, so they have something to transfer your spill response, your absorbed material into. Okay. So as far as spill response, you ask yourself, what do you need to do to clean up a spill? I've included a video there, a YouTube video that kind of walks through the steps. Are pretty straightforward, and there is some marketing information so we're going to skip through that. but there is a reference there if you want to walk through it with the supplier of spill response equipment. So as far as working through a spill, the first thing you want to do is inform your supervisor, let them know that you've had a spill, and then you're not working alone. You'll have my support. Your supervisor will contact me. And you want to make sure that if there are people in the area that you evacuate and clear the area. Makes it a lot easier if you have to clean up a spill. And then shut off any ignition sources. So, shut off your vehicle, shut off the pumps, shut off your equipment to make sure you're not working against, any electrical or conduit issues. You want to stop the flow of material, plug the hole, shut the valve off. Whatever's causing the spill, you don't want to work against that. So deal with that. And then go in and do the response. So some upfront work there. Inform the supervisor, clear the area, shut off the ignition sources, and stop the flow of material before responding. And then gather your spill kit materials, and then isolate. You want to make sure that you isolate storm drains, floor drains, waterways. You want to cut off the path between the source of that spill and any receptors that we had talked about earlier in this training. Okay, then surround the spill material at the leading edge and work your way back in toward the spill. And, when you apply the material, either the absorbent sheets, the floor dry, place it at the source and work your way from the leading edge in, clean from the outside of the spill, like I mentioned. Place the absorbent material in a container. Could be a 55-gallon drum, a 5-gallon bucket, a bag. Just make sure when you come back to the shop or to the yard, you have that material back in the waste collection area, which we'll talk about shortly here. And your supervisor can reach out to me and I'll coordinate the disposal of that material. You don't want to just toss it into a dumpster because it has to go to a dedicated disposal facility. And then as far as allowing any flow after that or opening up any pathways to receptors, you only want to do that after you've cleaned up and received permission from your supervisor. And then on a container or bag, you just make sure that you've identified the contents, and I've got an example there for something that I did a while ago. All right. So as far as waste materials, okay, and we're talking about waste materials such as the empty containers of the R11 and the pesticide herbicide. Okay, after you've triple rinsed those, if you're not aware already, we do have these roll-off boxes, and each of these roll-off boxes have dedicated waste materials because they go to specific disposal facilities that I work with. It's not a one-stop shop where they can accept everything. Each of these roll-off containers go to dedicated facilities that can handle that waste material. So at the Coachella yard, you see the different containers there, and at the Palm Desert yard, we have those dedicated containers as well, the roll-off boxes. Each one of those have signage with the dedicated waste material. So after the containers have been triple rinsed, your R11 and Aquamaster containers can go into commingle. You see they're plastic. That plastic ends up getting recycled. But we want to make sure that they're empty and they've been triple rinsed, of course. So how do you identify something that's recyclable? If you didn't know, there's this recycle designation, and based on the ranking, it can be recycled at different ways. You need to look for the recycled logo on it. That means it can go into the commingle container. And then as far as the Roundup poly drums, they too are recyclable. Unfortunately, the facility can't receive those and process those for recycling because the gauge thickness on that plastic is thicker than the other types of containers. So I am looking for outlets, ongoing process to find someone that can handle those for recycling. Until that happens, please make sure that you put those into the landfill roll-off because they can't be recycled based on that plastic thickness, okay? So if you have any questions, like I said, contact your supervisor. I'll be happy to work with them. And stay safe out there and protect those receptors. Thanks.